Okay, folks, this is Binder Maker taking a look at baseball in the 1870s. Things got going with baseball during the amateur era with teams such as the Knickerbockers and Atlantics. But by 1871, you have the first fully organized professional league, the National Association. Major League Baseball in the Hall of Fame does not consider this a major league, but Baseball Reference does, and so that is a major league on this channel. The National Association did have its problems and it gave way to the senior circuit. The good old National League began play in 1876. And everyone considers this a major league, and it, of course, has continued uninterrupted to the present. Rival major leagues came along after 1882, and these are all considered major leagues. You will see their stats on Baseball Reference or wherever you look for baseball statistics. They each had their flaws and did not survive long. The long-lasting and most significant was the American Association, also known as the Beer and Whiskey League, because they sold alcohol, unlike the National League. I understand it helped attendance, but got a little rowdy. For the purpose of this video, we're going to focus on the National Association and the National League. During its 5-season existence, 22 clubs competed at different times in the National Association. A flaw the league had was teams would fold after sometimes just a few games. However, some survived much longer. For example, the Boston Red Stockings franchise that played in the National Association today exists as the Atlanta Braves, and the Chicago White Stockings today exist as the Cubs. The Athletics and Nationals franchise no longer exists, but they would inspire later team names. Some teams that definitely do not exist, but it is so wonderful that they once did, were teams like the Cleveland Forest Cities, the Baltimore Canaries, the Fort Wayne Kicking-Nagas, the Elizabeth Resolutes, the Troy Haymakers, the New York Mutuals, the Hartford Dark Blues, and the Middletown Mansfields. It's cool to own some t-shirts of those teams. If you got in a time machine and attended a National Association game, you would notice some differences. The major ones were this is barehanded baseball. This style of play lasted through the 1880s. It caused broken fingers and more errors, about 4 to 5 a game, but it was considered the manly way to play at the time. Pitchers were required to throw underhanded, but this does not mean they were not hard to hit. Speed and movement on pitches had been an aspect of the game since the early 1860s, and later we will look at some hard throwers of this era. Another difference you would notice in your time machine was there was no mound. Instead, there was a pitcher's box that ended 50 feet from home plate. Apparently, some pitchers took a running start or even hopped as they threw. Finally, you had the old fair foul hit. Today, of course, a ball must remain fair past first or third to qualify as a ball in play. However, in this game, a ball that landed in fair territory initially, but then went foul even before first base was still in play and a fair ball. Players attempted to master this hit, and some did, as of course, if you could bounce it off the plate into foul territory, it became very difficult to defend against. This rule would last throughout the National Association era, but would be banned by the National League. When you go to Baseball Reference, which for those of you all do not know is the best source for baseball stats on the internet, you will see in the player bio information when they made their major league debut. And I always like this, how many players came before them. So for example, Evan Carter debuted on September 8th, 2023, and he was the 23,086th player in major league history. Well, have you ever wondered who was the first? Hall of Famer Deacon White was the leadoff hitter in the first National Association game. It was played on May 4th, 1871 in Fort Wayne between the Kicking-Nagas and the White's Cleveland Forest Cities. And then White led off with a hit. It was a good start to a Hall of Fame career, though it took him a while to get in. He was inducted in 2013, as you can see there, and that was 166 years after his birth. That makes him the oldest player ever inducted. Other Hall of Famers who played in the National Association included Candy Cummings, who it is claimed invented the curveball. Harry and George Wright were stars from the amateur era who were driving forces behind the organization of professional baseball. Albert Spalding, of course, is better known for his sporting goods company, but he was arguably the best player in this league. Cap Anson and Jim O'Rourke would have long careers playing in the 1890s, but getting their start in the National Association. In the National Association, teams played about 30 to 60 games a year. Teams in this era made their own schedules, and each was expected to schedule a 5-game series against every other team. The Philadelphia Athletics won the first pennant, defeating the Chicago White Stockings. Although this was hardly fair, a few weeks earlier, the White Stockings stadiums and all their equipment had been lost in the Great Chicago Fire. The White Stockings were able to continue the year with borrowed uniforms, but they did not play the next 2 years. And so that makes the Red Stockings, who are now the Atlanta Braves, the oldest continuous franchise because the White Stockings, now the Cubs, took 2 years off. The A's were led by Levi Merrill, who hit .492 or 64 hits and 138 bats that season. That is technically the major league record, but of course no one counts it, but still a very impressive feat, which clearly outdid all the best professional players that year. Overall, he had a 237 OPS plus. Although the Athletics won the first pennant, a flaw that the National Association had was that competitive imbalance had been created as several of the best players ended up on the Boston Red Stockings, who won the next 4 National Association pennants and really dominated the league. The Red Stockings were so dominant in part because they gathered most of their players from the Cincinnati Red Stockings. The Cincinnati Red Stockings were not the first professional team, as sometimes claimed, but they were one of the best, winning 84 straight games and having most of the best players. They were led by Harry Wright, and then when the team went out of business in 1870, he moved the team and most of the players to Boston, which began play in the National Association. All right, so there's the 1871 Boston Red Stockings, many players taken from the Cincinnati Red Stockings. The Red Stockings then included several of the Hall of Famers mentioned before. Deacon White came over from Cleveland in 1873. And then you had Ross Barnes, who was arguably the best player on the team. Some say he was a master of the fair foul hit, and taking advantage of that rule led to his success. And that has probably unfairly, in my opinion, kept him out of the Hall of Fame. I think if you dominate under the rules of the day, then that makes you an all-time great. When they changed the rules, however, he was facing injuries and was never the same, and his production dropped significantly. So you be the judge. Check for a later video in which we debate the MVP candidates of this era. Ross Barnes' name will come up several times. The Red Stockings were, of course, not playing at Fenway Park or even Braves Field, but here's a shot of the Boston baseball ground and a fun early image of what a baseball stadium looked like in this era. William Holbert was an owner of the Chicago White Stockings. They were back after recovering from the Great Fire in 1875, and he was jealous and upset about the success that Boston was having. He was also frustrated with the lack of organization in the National Association and the integrity of the league. The league had gotten a reputation for drunkenness and gambling, and not just the fans, but the players too. So in 1876, he declared war on the National Association. He violated league rules by signing several Boston players, including Spalding, Barnes, and White. From Philadelphia, he signed Cap Anson. To avoid getting in trouble, he formed his own league. The National League would be better organized and led by owners. There would be a league office and a set schedule. The league could discipline players who violated its rules and teams that did not finish out the season. Finally, it would be a family-friendly league with a ban on alcohol sales and Sunday games. All games would be 50 cents, which would keep the undesirables out. In addition, teams would only be placed in the larger cities. They would play a set schedule of 70 games. The original National League's teams included some teams from the National Association and some new teams. MLB and the Hall of Fame considered the first ever baseball game to, of course, been a National League game played on April 22nd, 1876, in which Boston defeated Philadelphia 6-5. For the 1876 season, with all the Boston players poached, Chicago would dominate the season. They went 52-14 to win the pennant. Ross Barnes led the league with a .429 batting average. Spalding led the league with 47 wins. And Deacon White led the league with 60 RBIs. Boston, which was now going by the name Red Caps, formerly the Red Stockings, got Deacon White back for the 1877 season, and he led the league in hits, batting, RBI, and an OPS of 950. Spalding, who was starting to focus on his sporting goods business, is replaced by Tommy Bond of Boston, who wins the pitching Triple Crown with 40 wins. The National League had its first scandal in 1877 when 4 players of the Louisville Grays were found to have accepted money from gamblers, including the popular Jim Devlin. William Holbert, the president of the National League, was determined to eliminate gambling in the game. He banned all players for life. In 1879, another Grays team, this one in Providence, would win the National League pennant. Jim O'Rourke and George Wright of the Red Caps jumped to Providence for 1879 to join John Montgomery Ward and Paul Hines. Ward had won 47 games as a 19-year-old rookie, and Paul Hines had won 2 straight batting titles. The Grays went 59 and 25. Okay, folks, that wraps up baseball in the 1870s. It was the first decade of professional baseball and was one for the record books, quite literally. Please click subscribe and check back for more videos as we examine the hypothetical MVP and Cy Young of each season of the 1870s and beyond.